Doctor, good evening. This is Mohan here. Thank you very much for joining in. Kayo, this is Commander Narayan here. Can you hear me? No, I can't hear you, Kayo. You are muted. You'll have to unmute yourself. You're muted, Kayo.
Yeah, just give me a minute, sir. I'm just trying to put on my headphones, sir. Can you hear me now, sir?
Loud and clear, Kayo. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll have to go. Just give me, I'll just disconnect.
Just to thank you for coming. Absolute privilege to have you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you much for all your endeavors and enthusiastic inspirations that you have derived from the whole system. Just give me a minute. Why is it going on? Why is it going on? Why isn't it going on? This leave.
Just say like that. Hello,
Good
Mohan.
evening.
Good evening, Mohan. How are you?
Such a pleasure to have you.
Yes, sir. I hope you can hear me now.
Loud and clear, Kayo.
Yes, please. And I will just go on muting. I'll go on mute form. In case you require, you can give me a shout.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Do you need any information from me or anything else?
No. Nilofar's given me whatever I wanted. She's a repository of everything on the Mehervanjis.
Thank you. Have you also done any research of how the heat has traveled to the other cargo holds? Because they don't show which was their main cargo hold for coals. It is a steam-fired boiler. They had their cargo hold somewhere, and they had the steam holds on the ship. But where is the steam holds? I can't figure out on that vessel.
No, it was only in the magazines. I know, because it was a defensively equipped merchant ship. They had a magazine, and steam drenching was available in the magazine. The number 2 hold had some sort of steam drenching, but they didn't use it at the right time. That's the reason why it became ineffective later on.
Okay, no, but did they
Rest
have
of it during the talk, Kayo.
Okay. Yeah.
Good evening, Mrs. Mystery. Good evening, Dr. Pandya. You are muted, sir. Can't hear you. Yes.
Now, can you hear me?
A little low, but yes, audible, but not very clear.
Your background looks very nice today.
Thank you. Thanks to all the help and prodding you gave us.
No. It is all your work.
Actually, it's the Indira docs.
It looks good, very good.
Thank you, doctor.
And as I don't know whether you can make out, but I can make out there's no blurring, distortion, anything when you move your head.
Thanks to your technical help and advice.
You're looking very pink and bright today, Commander.
Thank you, Dr. Modi. I hope my wife is hearing this.
So we had a lot of people asking us why we can't go above 700. I said, well, that's the limitation of the Zoom that we are using. I do not know how many will actually come. Everyone talks like this. Professor, Dr. Pandya, how do you spell this L-O-G-U-E?
Beg your pardon?
You got Dr. Valentine, L-O-G.
G-U-E, Valentine Logue.
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 So he's Irish?
Like, no, he was originally of Scottish origin, but settled in London and worked at Queen Square for most of his life.
Yes, I was wondering the surname was very unusual and I didn't know how to pronounce it. Yasmin, are you on?
I'm there.
Yes, good. Is Shobha there?
Let me see in the participants list.
Not yet.
No, not yet. Atma has joined.
Louisa is there.
We have about 14 of them, including all of us. We have 14 already.
Shobha is there. Shobha is muted.
આપણી શોભા નથી, શુભા છે. Pandya સાહેબ ની, Dr. Pandya na wife.
Okay, Dr. Shobha.
Yeah, she's there.
Shobha, can you hear me, Shobha? She can't hear me. She's muted. Dr. Pandya?
Yes. You want Shubha to reply?
Yes, I think so, sir.
Yeah, let me just talk. Yes, she says she has purposely muted herself and she can hear and she can see the proceedings very well.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
Dr. Modi and Dr. Pandya, Mr. Kayomer Meherwanji has joined us from Perth. He is the late Mr. Meherwanji's son. He got in touch with me this afternoon. I sent him the link and you can see him on the screen. Kayo, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Kayo. I am Mr. Meherwanji, Lovejoy Cecil, Daddy Meherwanji's son. He would call himself Love, Sincerity and Devotion, but his occupation is what he did best and he loved his occupation. And subsequently from that occupation of his services, people have derived a lot of inspiration. And I thank Mr. Commander Mohan Narayan for all his inspirational work that he's been doing on this project. Ever since, it's been a while, we have not discussed it personally, but this is the first time I'm here. Thank you.
Welcome, sir, from the K.R. Kama Institute and all of us.
Thank you, ma'am. Dad had attended many of the functions at CR Kama,
Wonderful.
KR Kama as well. And that was when he was Chief Fire Officer as chief guest, especially when you all had introduced the function with a lady. We had a Parsi lady who played the tabla and everything as well. So
Aban Mistry.
yes, please. Yes,
Aban
please.
Mistry.
Yeah, this is the time in 1980, 82, 83.
That's
So
right.
he was the chief guest over there then at that time. And subsequently, he was well known. So yeah, thank you very much for accommodating him and calling him as chief guest in different places at different times. And yeah. Anybody else would like to know anything before I go mute?
Tayo, this is Yasmin Khan here. How are you?
I'm good, Yasmin. How's everything with you? All fine. Surprising you're here. How is everything with you?
All well, all well. How's Yasmin?
Excellent.
Bachas?
Yeah, they're all fine. They're enjoying themselves in Perth. We don't have a lockdown, so and all
Yeah.
are double dose COVID, so everybody is enjoying themselves at the moment.
Good. Love to all at home.
Thank you. Will do. Will do.
Rumi has also sent his regards to you all.
Thank you. Regards to you all as well. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.
No one continuing in the profession of firefighting?
No, I was the probable candidate. Dad suggested that I should complete my graduation and take on the services, but nah, I don't think with the situation that was then was not conducive for me, in the sense is there was a lot of political debate as well as corruption at that end. So I don't think I would have survived that kind of a situation. So I moved out to better occupation as in seafaring. So I'm basically a seafarer myself.
We have this iconic picture of the gentleman standing on top of the tender by which we identify him.
Yes.
You must be having the original, I'm sure.
Not a tender. I think it's a turntable ladder which they had used during the docks explosion.
Okay, but
During the docks explosion, he had used that. I probably subsequently will probably show you some photos. But yeah, Mr. Mohan will have all the photos, I guess.
what's the time in Perth?
Presently, it's 8:30 in the night, in the evening. We are 2.5 hours ahead of you.
Are we, Dr. Pandya, do we start exactly at 6 or you want to give it a few?
No, I think we should start exactly at 6. This is what Dr. Nawaz Modi also has been very particular about all the time.
Yeah, that's thanks to Mr. Kama. That was his basic policy. 6 means 600.
I think Commander Narayan is gone off the screen. Ah, there he is.
No, I just switched off bandwidth issues. So I said, okay, let me go off the screen.
What's the number like now, Yasmin?
20,
It's
20, ma'am,
20.
including us.
You're not going to reach 100.
They will all trickle in, I think, gradually.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock. May I start with your permission?
Yeah, ma'am, switch on your video, please.
Is it on?
No, Dr. Modi, we can't see you.
My video is stopped, but the microphone is unmuted. I do not know. Something has gone wrong with the video.
Okay, then it's okay. You can just carry on.
I'll just start because we don't
Yeah.
want to waste time. You know?
Right.
Good evening and welcome to all of you to this very unique and program which we have been looking forward to for a long time. The lecture on raining gold and mayhem, the Bombay dock explosion of 1944 by Commander Mohan Narayan. It is indeed a great privilege for us to have Dr. Narayan speak to us on this topic. And it is also a great privilege to have Dr. Sunil Pandya, who has very graciously agreed to chair this session. I'm sure many of you would be knowing Dr. Sunil Pandya as an eminent neurosurgeon attached to the Jaslok Hospital and Research Center. But not many of you would know that he's also a very eminent scholar who has completed his doctorate in the Faculty of Arts and has published extensively on various topics, including a wonderful book on the history of the Sir J.J. Hospital, which has been his alma mater. Just a few details about him as a professional. He finished his MBBS and his MS degrees from the JJ Group of Hospitals, and subsequently he trained under Dr. Gajendra Singh at the JJ Hospital and Dr. Homi Dastur at the KM Hospital in neurosurgery. So after that, he was awarded a Commonwealth Medical Scholarship where he trained in the Institute of Neurology in London under Professor Valentine Logue and at the Institute of Child Health in Great Ormond Street, London, with Dr. Kenneth Till and Norman Grant between 1974 and 1975. What I found particularly unique, because after that he worked as a professor at the GS Hospital for a spate of almost more than 20 years, his academic interests continued and he was very strongly influenced to write and create awareness on medical ethics. So he has been the editor of the Journal of Indian Medical Ethics and has researched and published extensively on this topic. And therefore, we have with us a very unique professional and a researcher, and I therefore hand over the proceedings to Dr. Sunil Pandya.
Thank you, Dr. Modi, and especially thank you for your very kind words. We are in for a treat this evening when Commander Mohan Narayan talks to us about that very, very important event that literally shook the south of Bombay. Commander Narayan graduated from the National Defense Academy in Pune. This is a very prestigious academy, and it has given India 11 chiefs of the naval staff, starting from Dr. L.N. Ramdas to Karambir Singh. So he has studied in a very, very eminent organization, and he has imbibed the best characteristics that have been taught over there. After his graduation from the academy, he specialized in electronic warfare. I didn't know anything about what electronic warfare means, so I tried to look it up, and I understand that it involves the use of signals such as radio, infrared, and radar, and the more modern developments after that, detect, to protect, and to communicate. And they can also be used to deny adversaries the ability to either disrupt or use these signals. And this is his area of specialty. And this is what he has worked on throughout the period that he was in service. His studies in history, which is what is of major interest to us today, intensified after his retirement from the Navy. And they resulted in improvements at the Maritime History Museum, the Ballard Bandar Museum, the Bombay Castle itself, that very, very prestigious and historic place. And he has conducted heritage walks in the 500-year-old naval dockyard. He has, of course, delivered a number of fascinating talks pertaining to maritime warfare and maritime activities. You can get a measure of his modesty from his response to an interviewer who asked him a question. And he told that interviewer, "I am not a historian. If you want to be charitable, call me a history buff." When he started studying the explosion, that is the subject of his talk today, he found that most of those who had written on the subject talked about what happened after the explosion. The loss of lives, the loss of property, the impact and sound of the explosion, and the gold that people continued to find on the streets days after the explosion. But what perturbed him was that not many actually wrote and spoke about why it happened. And so in that interview which I referred to, he pointed out that he wanted to bring out that story. Was it just an accident, or was it a disaster waiting to happen? And after working on it for about 7 months, he came to a stage where he nearly gave up. Except for one book by an American author, John Edis, he didn't find any literature on the subject by Indian authors. And then he read about an inquiry commission which had been set up. And after he got hold of that report, he could work backwards from that report to gather together what he's going to narrate to us today. It is important to continue to remember that the study of history is meaningless if we do not learn from it, and if we do not set up improvements and preventive measures. And it is to this purpose that Commander Narayan spotlights the systemic failure that caused the dock explosion and why it is symptomatic of our times. As he put it, it brings to mind the hoary cliche of the spirit of Mumbai when officialdom fails the people. Over to you, Commander Narayan, for what we look forward to as a very, very learned and informative talk.
Thank you, Dr. Pandya, for that wonderful introduction. At the outset, please let me thank the trustees of the K.R. Kama Oriental Research Institute, Dr. Nawaz Modi, the Honorary Joint Secretary, and Mrs. Yasmin Khan for this invitation to deliver this talk. I would like to also take this opportunity. I would also like to thank Mrs. Hutokshi Mistry, who is a principal of the Pandya School at Tardev, for giving the technical support and backup to this event, and the very venerable Dr. Sunil Pandya for so graciously consenting to chair and moderate this session. It's a privilege being here. Thank you, everybody. When the PowerPoint is on, I'm going to switch off my video for better bandwidth so that you can have more clarity in the PowerPoint presentation and you can hear me talk. I'm switching off my video now. Raining gold, raining mayhem, the Bombay dock explosion of 1944. I want to begin this evening's presentation with a dedication. This talk is dedicated to all those who lost their lives in that unfortunate accident of 14th April 1944, especially those 66 firemen who gave up their lives so that rest of Bombay could live. This talk is dedicated in their memory. I'm going to show you a small clip from YouTube, which will put today's talk in perspective.
Bombay, gateway to India, and Signal Corps films of one of the worst disasters in India's history. A mysterious fire on a Liberty ship carrying munitions. Then a terrific explosion that scatters flame and destruction throughout the harbor area. 70 men and 7 engines of the Bombay Fire Brigade disappeared without trace on the docks. The first of 2 huge blasts hurled one 4,000-ton ship up on the wharf and rained debris and white-hot steel over Bombay, starting fires that destroyed whole sections of the city. Fire through 3 days and nights makes 50,000 homeless. Bombay's formerly peaceful streets present the appearance of an earthquake. Whole blocks are blown flat, and pieces of the ship lie thousands of yards from the dock area. Property damage over $150 million, 1,040 injured, 336 dead. 20 minutes later, another explosion. Hundreds of miles from any battlefront, Bombay feels the hot and deadly hand of war.
If you've listened to the voiceover, the narrator right in the beginning says, all that death, destruction, and gore which you saw on the clip was caused by a mysterious fire. Now, all fires, mysterious or otherwise, have a definite cause. So what was the cause of this fire which caused so much of death and destruction over the city for 3 days and 3 nights? Was it an unfortunate accident and therefore an aberration? Or was it because of enemy sabotage action? Was it because of enemy sabotage action? Because please remember, April 1944, the Second World War was very much on, and Bombay, being an important staging port of the Allied forces, was the primary target for the enemy. Or then, was it caused because of another of man's unending follies? But we are getting ahead of the story, so please permit me to take you back to where it all began. Most stories of the sea have a ship as its protagonist, and this evening's tale, being basically a nautical one, is no different. And the prima donna of today's story is the SS Fort Steichen. This is the SS Fort Steichen. This is, in fact, this is the only image of the Steichen either in any book or on the net. To most of us, the United States entered the Second World War a day after Pearl Harbor, that is 7th December 1941. But They were vicariously in this conflict right from March 1941, when the US Congress, at the behest of President Roosevelt, passed what was grandiosely called an act to promote the defense of the United States. This act was more popularly known as the Lend-Lease Act, whereby the Congress authorized President Roosevelt to aid the Allied forces not only with implements of war, but also humanitarian aid like food grains, clothing, etc. And under the Lend-Lease Act, the United States nearly spent $50 billion in support of the Allied forces. At $50 billion in today's value would be approximately a little less than $700 billion. As part of the Lend-Lease Act, 26 ships of the Ford class were manufactured in 12 shipyards across Canada. One of them was the Steichen, named after a river in British Columbia. The Steichen was built at the Prince Rupert Dry Dock and Shipbuilders at Vancouver. Her keel was laid in July 1940, and by July 1942, she was commissioned into service, and on commissioning was handed over by the United States government to the British government under the Lend-Lease Act. Between July 1942 and February 1944, the Steichen made about 4 voyages ferrying war stores between European ports and ports between the United States and Europe. And by early February 1944, she was at Birkenhead on the west coast of England. Now, these are the main characteristics of the Steichen. It's self-explanatory. Now, to those who don't have a marine background, GRT stands for Gross Registered Tonnage, and it's the total internal volume of a ship, which will include the machinery spaces, the auxiliary machinery spaces, living spaces, and the cargo holds. NRT stands for Net Registered Tonnage. The GRT minus the living spaces, the machinery spaces, and the auxiliary machinery spaces will give you the cargo carrying capacity of the ship. And the cargo carrying capacity of the ship, of a merchant ship, is the NRT, Net Registered Tonnage, which, in other words, is the earning capacity of the ship. Now, cargo is normally carried in holds. You will keep coming across this term, cargo hold, hatch, port, starboard. So just let me explain what it means. This is the forward end of the ship, the after end of the ship. The Steichen had five cargo holds. A cargo hold is nothing but a compartment in which cargo is stored. And on the Steichen, you had 5 cargo holds, starting from fore to aft. This is the number 1 cargo hold, the number 2 cargo hold, the number 3 cargo hold, the number 4 cargo hold, and number 5. You'll also keep coming across this term port and starboard. On a ship, the left-hand side is port, the right-hand side is starboard, spelled as starboard, but in the marine world, we pronounce it as starboard. We'll come to the cargo hold a little later. Draft is that part of the ship which is under the water. You had a draft of about 27 feet. She was propelled by steam, and those who may be technically inclined, the engines were reciprocating engines, which means you have water, you boil water with the coal on board, you make steam, and that drove your engines, steam-driven ships.
Invite. Click on invite.
No ocean greyhound could do a steady 10 knots very sturdy. Now, like you register your cars and bicycles and motor cars, every ship has to be registered. The most popular registry those days was Lloyd's of London, and she was registered by Lloyd's. And this, I'll explain what these symbols stands for. Normally, when a ship is being built, she's not surveyed. She's only surveyed after it's built. But there are some ships which are surveyed when they are built and also when they are completed. This symbol here, sort of a cross, means she was surveyed both during construction and after construction. 100A would stand for she met all specifications of Lloyd's of London. And the numeral 1 is the state of our anchor and cables. In short, Steichen was in fine fettle. And this is important because what happened 2 years later could not be blamed due to faulty workmanship. The home port was London. Now, this is again for the benefit of those who don't have a marine background. I'll explain what a cargo hold is and what a hatch. These terms will be referred to very often in this talk. Look at the lower picture. You're getting a top view, a plan view of a deck of a merchant ship. This is the top view. What you see here, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, are the holes as you see it on top. And these are hatches, or basically, they slide along the deck. And when the ship is at sea, these hatches are closed, so there is no ingress of water. This is the top view. If you look at the side view, this is number 1 hole here. The one which is crossed is not, it's the bilges of a ship. This is what you see as a hole. The hole has 2 parts, upper part and lower part. And this is the hatch which closes it. Most ships have a crane because they use these cranes to discharge cargo. Like I said, this is not the Steichen because there is nothing available of the Steichen, but it's an equivalent thing of a merchant ship. This is just to show what a cargo hold, what a hatch is. The bilges, what you see here, is where all the slush from the sewage, the other waste, and the slush on the engines are collected here, and it is thrown overboard through these valves. Now, these valves they open only in one direction. They allow the slush to go out from the ship into the sea and not the other way around, for obvious reasons. Now, this is what a fully laden ship will look like in harbor. She's a bulk carrier loading pole. These are the holes which I was talking about. And these are the hatches which are open now. At sea, these hatches are closed. So they are watertight and there's no ingress of water inside. So in early Feb 1944, the Steichen was at Birkenhead on the west coast of England going to load for a 5th and what would turn out to be a final and fateful voyage. This is Birkenhead on the west coast of England. And this inlet here has been enlarged. This is an enlarged view of that bay. Now the River Mersey empties into the sea here, and there are a whole lot of ports on the southern and northern bank of the river, the most important being Birkenhead and Liverpool. These are the 2 important ports. Now, by a very strange coincidence, the regulations for the operation of Bombay Port Trust are based on the regulations of the Merseyside ports. It's a strange coincidence. Liverpool is actually the most important port on the River Mersey, but people of my generation and many in this audience might remember Liverpool for an entirely different reason. no prizes actually for guessing who the Fabulous Four is. The boys from Liverpool, the original Fabulous Four. They changed the world of music. This is the modern port of Birkenhead, not very different. Let some more infrastructure come up on this side. Otherwise, this is what Birkenhead looks like. Now, what was she? At Birkenhead, Steichen was loading dangerous and glamorous cargo. Let's see what the dangerous and glamorous cargo were. She was loading for Karachi and Bombay. For Karachi, there were gliders which were in completely knocked down condition in crates. The Spitfire fighter aircraft, 12 crates, which had the Spitfires in CKD condition. And these crates were surrounded by explosives and ammunition. This is what a glider would look like in a fully assembled condition. This is what a Spitfire aircraft will look like, or look like. Ammunition was kept in boxes. This is not the kind of storage which happened on Steichen, but this is only representative. That was the dangerous cargo. What was the glamorous cargo being taken on board Birkenhead? That was for Bombay. She was loading for Bombay, and what was being loaded was 1,325 tons of explosives of all kinds, and they were kept in holds number 1 to hold number 4. There were 3 kinds of ammunition which was being embarked: category A, category B, category C. We'll come to that later. And also for Bombay, gold bars were being loaded in 31 crates. Each crate had 4 gold bars, and the weight of each gold bar was 28 pounds. So the total gold bars being carried were 124 gold bars, and the total gold being carried was nearly 1.5 tons, about 1,578 kilos. Now, what was this gold being carried for? This was part of Britain's part reparation of the wartime debt to India. Now, if you look at it that way, it's a very righteous thing to do for a colonizer to repay its debt to the colonized. But mull over this fact. For some time, the British were buying gold from South Africa at 17 shillings an ounce. The same gold, when it was shipped to India as part reparation, was valued at 320 shillings. You buy at 17 shillings per ounce, sell it or value that at 320 shillings an ounce when you send it to India. The total consignment, the cost of the total consignment was about 48,000 pounds. But when it was sent to India, it was valued at 8,88,000. It was financial malfeasance at its devious best. Being World War II, Steichen's destination was known to very few people. Certain port officials, the ship's crew, of course, knew the destination was Bombay and Karachi and Bombay in that order. And while she was loading at the jet, at the quay, boxes earmarked for Karachi and Bombay, or crates, as we call it, hugely stenciled Karachi and Bombay, which means anybody and anyone who was on the jetty and cared to notice could guess the destination of the ship. So much for wartime security. So, Second World War, ships always moved in a convoy. Merchant ships, some of them were lightly armed, but they really had no defense against enemy aircraft and submarines. And merchant ship was a juicy target for enemy submarines and aircraft. So they would always be escorted in a convoy. This is what a typical Second World War convoy would look. You would have the merchant ships in the center and ringed by warships. So Steichen was part of a convoy which left Birkenhead on the 24th of February in a convoy. From Birkenhead into the Irish Sea, English Channel, Atlantic Ocean, down the coast of Portugal, and came up to Cape Trafalgar. This was a 50-ship convoy. Off Cape Trafalgar, this convoy split. A major part of the convoy went south along the west coast of Africa. A 12-ship convoy, including the Steichen, continued eastwards towards the Mediterranean Sea. And when this depleted convoy was moving towards the Mediterranean Sea, another convoy from the United States joined in, and this regrouped convoy continued their journey eastwards into the Mediterranean. Off Algiers on 9th March, they came under a heavy air attack of German bombers, but the attack was repulsed, no great loss. 11th of March, off the coast of Sicily, this convoy again split. Major part of the convoy went into the Aegean, and the Steichen, which was part of a 12-ship convoy, continued eastwards right through the Mediterranean, entered the Suez Canal. Here, this is the Suez Canal, came here and stopped at Port Tawfiq, which is modern Port Suez, for bunkering. Now, bunkering is a term which came in with coal ships. Basically, you took in coal because the ship would have depleted fuel by burning coal. So they took in coal and they also took in victuals, both fresh and dry. And after bunkering, this convoy continued its journey into the Red Sea to Aden, the great coaling port of Africa, Aden. We did a day stop at Aden, again took in coal, and then this convoy split. 11 ships went onwards to Bombay, and Steichen alone, right through the North Arabian Sea, took this journey up to Karachi to arrive at Karachi on 30th March. By 3 p.m. 30th March, he was at Karachi. Between 3 p.m. on 30th March and 8 a.m. on 3rd April, all the stores which were earmarked for Karachi was disembarked. And the stores earmarked for Karachi were the gliders and the Spitfire aircrafts in CKD condition and some amount of ammunition. After this was offloaded, it created a huge cavernous space inside the Steichen amounting to 286,000 cubic feet. This space had to be occupied by cargo to be disembarked at Bombay. Now, before we go into what was loaded at Karachi, just a quick glance at what were the regulations the books or the rules governing loading of cargo. These were the rules in force for loading cargo, and we will look at the salient features of this vis-a-vis the cargo that would be loaded at Karachi. This is cotton. Cotton used to be pressed into bales like this. You could carry cotton, but you had to take precautions that it was not in close proximity to lubricating oil or grease, because cotton is susceptible to spontaneous combustion. There was a belief that wet cotton was combustible, but that was disproved. But you still could not carry wet cotton because it was susceptible to rapid deterioration. And if it got wet, it had to be jettisoned overboard. This was for cotton. Lubricating oil. It had to be carried in drums or barrels which were not leaking. And if they were kept in holes where even cotton was, you could not carry more than 250 drums of lubricating oil in the same hole. If you are embarking cotton, lubricating oil, and ammunition, then these had to be put at opposite ends of the ship. You couldn't put it in the same hole. Aircraft dope is nothing but gun cotton. It is nitrocellulose, highly inflammable. And this is basically plasticized lacquer, which is used on ships or on aircraft frames, which are made of cloth. It gives it elasticity and makes it absolutely airtight. Same, it could, if you were carrying cotton and lube oil, then obviously you could not keep gun cotton in the same hole. And of all the cargo carried by Steichen, this would be the most inflammable and the most dangerous. Timber you could carry, but avoid placing in the same hole as explosives. Scrap iron, avoid placing in the same hole as explosives, because if the explosion took place, the pellets in the scrap iron would cause collateral damage. Sulfur, you couldn't keep it in the same hole which had edible cargo. Really no restrictions on carrying gold, except that you have to cater for adequate security. No restrictions on carrying these items, except that when you load it into a hole, you have to mind the ship's stability. Let's see what was carried at Karachi. Cotton, 8,700 bales of cotton, or approximately 1,400 tons in hole number 1, 2, 4, and 5. So far, so good. Lubricating oil, 10,976 drums in the holes as shown. Now, remember, if you were carrying cotton and lubricating oil, you could not have more than 250 drums of lubricating oil. You were carrying 10,976 drums, most of it in hole number 3. But the other holes, 1, 2, and 5, each carried more than 500 lubricating drums. Explosives, the same hole where you had cotton, you had 1,395 tons of explosives. Sulfur, hole number 1, really not a problem. Timber, where you had explosives, you put timber also. Aircraft dope or gun cotton, 20 tons in hole number 3. Hole number 3 had a whole lot of lubricating oil. So you put lubricating oil and you put gun cotton, highly inflammable. Gold bars was really not a problem, it was put in number 2 hole. Now, if you look at it, the kind of cargo which was carried in the holes, every rule, every canon was broken. Now, does it mean that the ship's captain was an imbecile and he didn't know what he was doing? No, the ship's crew did protest. But please remember, during wartime, a lot of safety regulations are given the go. And cotton, cotton was very important for the Indian economy. At least that's what the English told us. Before the war, cotton had a huge market abroad. And once the war started, those markets were not available. So the British told us that if cotton, so much of cotton will be available, these farmers will suffer, they will not get the price for the product. So it will be a controlled item, and we will only allow cotton from Karachi, because Karachi was the main port of embarkation of cotton from the cotton farms of Punjab and Sindh, would be carried only by ships between Karachi and Bombay. That is what was the English viewpoint. But actually, the real issue was the cotton mills in Bombay clothed the entire Allied forces. So cotton mills were in Bombay, cotton was in the hinterland of Karachi. Cotton could have very well been carried by road or rail, but the British were paranoid that it would lead to a whole lot of pilferage and they would lose cotton. So they gave a directive that cotton, if it had to be taken by road or rail between Bombay and Karachi, that it had to have special permission, which was normally denied. Because of which, most of the cotton which came from Karachi to Bombay came by ships. And there was a directive from the War Department that any ship which was plying between Karachi and Bombay had to take maximum cotton. The ship staff was overruled by the government department at Karachi, and that is why they had to carry all this equipment, carry all this cargo. And if you look at this, anything and everything that would go up was kept in those holds. And when it did go, everything did go. And if you look at this, there's a very famous saying that, whether it be British India or independent India, Bombay's problems always begin at Karachi. The Cycling departed from Karachi on 9th April 1944, did a 3-day passage to Bombay, uneventful, except that the fish and fish manure, which was kept in number 1 hold, turned rancid. And because it turned rancid, it started emitting a foul stench. But because the ship was at sea and you had the sea breeze blowing across, the effect was not so much. It was livable. That became a very crucial thing when she entered harbor. We'll see that later. This is the port of Bombay. This magnificent infrastructure which you see on the eastern seaboard of Bombay. This entire thing. This is the Sassoon dock. This part is the naval dockyard, or the erstwhile Bombay dockyard of the Wadias, exclusively a naval preserve even then. So no merchant ships were allowed here. These are the 3 wet docks which came up. The Alexandra dock, since renamed the Indira dock, the Victoria dock here, and the Princess dock. This magnificent infrastructure which came up on the eastern seaboard, was entirely a British creation. But if you think that this was created because of great planning and great forethought by the British, then think again. This entire infrastructure came up because of a folly of the government. What that folly was and how it panned out to create this is outside the purview of this talk. This is the aerial view of the Eastern Seaboard 1937 from Ballot Pier. The same view. This is the naval dockyard. So this is not going to be discussed today. These are the 3 main wet docks: the Alexandra dock, the Indira dock, the Victoria dock, and the Princess dock. What were the rules governing handling of explosives during peacetime in Bombay? Under the regulations for the port of Bombay, every ship which carried dangerous or hazardous cargo had to fly a red flag at the yard. The yardarm is the horizontal portion of the mast, and this flag is normally called flag B or flag Bravo phonetically. What it means that any ship which is carrying this flag, it's an indication for the others in the vicinity that to exercise caution because she is carrying hazardous cargo. Under the port trust regulations, no ammunition or explosives could be disembarked in the dock area. It had to be disembarked in lighters at anchorage. And once it was disembarked, it could not be stored in the docks. It had to be carted away immediately. You will see what a lighter looks like. Now, this is what a lighter is. This is a merchant ship at anchorage here. And you see the smaller ships here on either side, the port and starboard side. These are the lighters. So when a ship comes and anchors here, they tie up, the lighters tie up on either side, and the ship is discharging cargo from the hold into the lighters. So the lighter might have its own means of propulsion, or it may not have a propulsion, in which case it is towed. And those lighters are called dumb lighters. When the war broke out, the Defense of India rules were invoked, and under Rule 88 of DIR, following waivers were given for a very good reason. I told you every ship carrying dangerous cargo had to fly flag Bravo. In wartime, it was waived off, and the reason for that was any ship in harbor which was flying the red flag became a juicy target for enemy aircraft and saboteurs. It was as good as saying, "Come and hit me." Ammunition could not be disembarked in the docks, but this also was waived off if a certificate of urgency was given by the embarkation headquarters. The embarkation headquarters is an inter-service organization, Army, Navy, Air Force, in each port, and they are responsible for the arms and explosives which come in, and the safe disembarkation and the stowage and the carriage of the ammunition. I told you earlier, you had, ammunition was classified as category A, category B, category C. Category A explosives were highly sensitive and would detonate on pressure, because of which they could be disembarked within the dock area, but they could be disembarked only in lighters, and they could not be stored inside the docks. You disembark in lighters and you take it away from the dock area. Category B was less dangerous. It would explode only on combustion. So Category B ammunition could be disembarked into railway wagons, which were on the jetty, but they could not be stored in the docks. Both had to be carted. Category C explosives were relatively safe, a mixture of A and B, but rendered safe. They could be disembarked into wagons and could be stored in the docks till they were eventually cut. This was the waiver given by the government of India for loading and unloading hazardous cargo. The port trust, of course, was not very happy with it because it created greater risk in handling hazardous cargo, and because of which, if there was any accident occurred because of handling of this cargo, the port trust was indemnized. In the long history of Bombay, ships, cotton, explosives, fire, senseless death, they all played their part. And on the fateful full moon of 12th April 1944, as the Steichen was preparing to go into the Victoria dock and take up a reassigned berth, a devastating encore was about to happen. 12th April, after the certificate of agency was given, Steichen entered Victoria dock and took up a position at berth number 1. Now, At berth number 1, because of wartime regulations, the Bombay Auxiliary Fire Service always had a fire tender. It was manned by a section leader and 6 people. Now, a word about the Bombay Auxiliary Air Service. When World War II broke out in 1939, an air raid precaution unit was set up at Bombay, and it consisted of 3 wings. It had the Auxiliary Fire Service, it had the rescue services, and it had the ambulance service. This is something equivalent of the civil defense we have now. By 1943, the government of India had decreed that Bombay was not under any air threat, and it declared Bombay as a white area. What it meant was no air threat, but light attack from the sea. And because of the huge expenditure which was involved in maintaining the air raid precaution unit, the government decreed that they should be disbanded. The government of Bombay was not very happy with it. They were quite happy to disband the ambulance services and the rescue services because enough private ambulance service had come up in the city and the Bombay Salvage Corps could take over the rescue services. But they wanted to retain the Bombay Auxiliary Fire Service. Negotiations went on and ultimately the government of India relented and allowed Bombay to retain 25% of the Bombay Auxiliary Fire Service. It is the Bombay Auxiliary Fire Service which saved the day for the city during the explosion. When the ship came alongside, the foreman of the stevedores, Mr. Desai, came on board, met the ship's officers, and started and made out his plan for disembarking cargo. He was not told of the ammunition which was being carried on board, and that's why he didn't requisition any lighters. Remember, certificate of urgency given, which meant the ammunition had to be disembarked. But the foreman of stevedores, Mr. Desai, who was in charge of offloading cargo, had no idea that the ship was carrying ammunition and hence didn't requisition lighters. The ship was very keen to get rid of the gold. This gold was consigned to the Reserve Bank of India, and they got in touch with the bank authorities who came on board, and the bank refused to take the gold because they remember the 31 boxes were kept in a safe, and the safe was welded onto the bulkhead, and around the bulkhead was the ammunition. The bank officers in his wisdom said that they will not take the individual boxes, but they would want the entire safe to be taken, which meant welding had to take place with ammunition intact. The ship's officers refused and said, till the ammunition is out, we cannot do welding. And so the gold remained on board, which could have been, those 31 boxes could have been taken by the bank, but they said they wanted with the safe. They would rule that decision. The fish had turned rancid, and that is why the ship staff requested the foreman of stevedores that if they could, since no ammunition could be disembarked, no cotton could be disembarked because of lighters not being present, could the fish be taken out, because in a confined space in the harbor, the stench was unbearable. Certificate of urgency given, but not a single person from the ordnance department of the port trust came on board and inquired about the ammunition. It's only on the morning of 13th that they came on board and briefed Mr. Desai on disembarking ammunition. And to his surprise, he found that there were not even lighters which were placed along the ship. Forenoon of 14th April, the ship's engine had developed a problem, and the ship staff requested that these engines be repaired. Approval was given by the agents. But what it meant was, in case of an emergency, if the main engine had to be used, it was not possible to use them because of the repairs going on. She came alongside on 12th of April, and by 12:30, by 14th April, 1,400 tons of cargo was disembarked. What was disembarked was this. This was the cargo which was disembarked by the afternoon of 14th April. The lighters came alongside only in the afternoon of 13th April. So between 13th April and the forenoon of 14th April, 400 tons of ammunition could be taken out. (12:30 to 1:30) was the lunch break now. And this was the disposition of ships in the Princess and Victoria dock. This is the Victoria dock. You had 14 ships here, 12 ships in the Princess dock. I want you to look at this. This is the Stykey, port side 2 along the jetty. Right across the water was a sister ship, Port Clavier. Behind her was the ship Jalapadma. And this ship here was Iran. This lateral separation was about 1,200 feet. 2 cables, 1,200 feet. 12:30 lunch break. The entire working party went off to have lunch. The chief officer of Iran, Fort Clavier, which was the sister ship, had his lunch, came up on the upper deck of the ship at 12:30 and to smoke a cigarette. And when he looked across here, he saw puffs of smoke coming out from the number 2 hold. Now, please remember, the ship was not flying the red flag, so he had no idea of what was being carried by the ship. And he thought that if he's seeing it from this distance, surely somebody on board would have seen it. Similarly, sorry for that. Yeah. Similar to that, this is the SS Iran. The sentry on board, when he was walking up and down the upper deck, he also saw smoke coming out from the number 2 hold. Puffs of smoke coming out, and he also had no idea what was being carried on Stykey. So he did not raise any alarm, and he thought, well, if he has seen it, those on board would have also seen it. Behind Iran here was the Green Gate, which is the exit for Victoria Dock. And Sub-Inspector Critchell of the Mumbai Police, who was here, he also saw smoke coming out, but took no action for the same reasons. Which means the smoke which was coming out from the number 2 hold was seen by people who were not on board, but nobody on board Stykey noticed it. It is incredulous, but no alarm was raised. What it meant was the cat's paw of the winds of destruction went unseen and unheeded by people in Victoria Dock. At 1:30 post-lunch, when the stevedores came back, it was business as usual, and they started disembarking ammunition. Now, at 13:45, this was the state of cargo on board the Stykey. And you might not be able to read this, so I've given a color code here. These are the holds. Number 1, number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Red stands for ammunition. Yellow is iron. Green is cotton. And blue is lubricating oil. I want you to concentrate on number 2 and number 4 hold. You have ammunition, you have timber, iron, etc. You have cotton, you have ammunition. And look at number 4 hold. Nearly 4 times ammunition in number 4 hold. And the puff of smoke which was coming out from here. When they came back on board and they started disembarking, that is when the stevedores saw the smoke coming out in number 2 hold. The minute they saw this, they raised a fire alarm, rushed out of the hold, and there was a near stampede at the gangway because the stevedores from the other holds also came out and they wanted to rush out of the ship because they were not trained for firefighting. That was the job of the ship staff and the firefighting department. As they stepped out of the gangway is basically it's a connection. It joins the ship to the jetty. With the stampede going on at the gangway and people raising a fire alarm, the section leader of the fire tender on the jetty, who was part of the auxiliary fire service, saw this. And he started connecting his hose and coming on to the ship. And as he crossed the gangway because of the stampede there, he told his assistant that please go to the nearest telephone and pass number 2 message to the Victoria Dock fire station. What it meant was the number 2 message was a code which said a ship carrying ammunition was on fire. The assistant sub-leader went to the nearest shed. He saw a telephone. He picked up the telephone, but it was dead. It was actually not dead. It was the old telephone that you pick up the telephone, wait for a couple of seconds, the exchange connects you and connects you to whichever number. The exchange comes up on the line and then gives you the extension number he wants. But because of the panic and in his hurry, he didn't find a dial tone. He thought the telephone is not working. So he kept the telephone down, came out to the jetty, walked back, and then he saw those fire alarms in glass cases. He smacked the glass, pressed the bell. It did indicate that there was a fire within the docks, but didn't indicate the gravity of the fire. If the number 2 message had been passed to the Victoria Fire Control Victoria Fire Station, they would have realized the gravity of the situation. But this being an alarm which came from that alarm box, they thought it's a normal fire and they dispatched only 2 fire tenders to the station, 2 fire tenders to the ship. It was actually a major fire, but they took it as a minor fire. Only 2 fire tenders came onto the ship. When the fire tenders came on board and the section leader of the fire tender came on board and saw for himself that this ship is on fire and is carrying ammunition on board, he realized the gravity. It was then that the number 2 message was passed by the leader to the Victoria Dock Station, to the Victoria Fire Station. The first alarm, 13:45. By the time the number 2 message was sent to the fire station was 2:30. 45 minutes had elapsed. There was fire in the number 2 hold. There was intense heat and there was intense smoke. Now, the fire hoses were rigged up by the ship. The ship had its own hoses. The auxiliary fire tender had their own hoses. And you had the fire tenders from the Victoria Fire Station putting in their hoses. They were putting water into the number 2 hole without knowing exactly where is the seat of the fire. And to determine that, 2 attempts were made to enter the number 2 hole. But because of the intense heat, they could not sustain themselves there, and the firemen came out and still So without ascertaining the seat of fire, they were blindly pumping in water into the hold. There were 11 hoses pouring water into the number 2 hold. When the number 2 message was passed, Captain B.T. Oberst, who was the ordnance officer, came on board, met the ship's staff, had a look at the cargo stowage plan, and he had this to say. Now, if you discount the grandstanding, this is one gentleman who should have actually known the kind of ammunition which was being carried on board. The ship had come in on 12th of April at 12 o'clock. Ammunition was disembarked only in the afternoon of 13th because no lighters were placed. His staff had come on board on 13th morning, had a look at it, but either he was not aware of it or he didn't know about it. So this grandstanding has to be discounted. With the number 2 alarm passed, there were a whole lot of people who had gathered at berth number 1. All the bigwigs of the port trust, the fire department, and from the Navy. These were the gentlemen who were there on the jetty, and what were they discussing? They were discussing the various options which were available to douse the fire or prevent an explosion. And the options given were Steichen to be moved out of Victoria Dock under our own power. Now that was not feasible because remember, 14th morning, repairs were being carried out to the main engine and the engines were not going to be available. So this option was out. The second option was get in the tugs and tow her out of the harbor. But at that point of time, there were 14 ships coming in and out of the other docks and no tug was available. The third option which they discussed was scuttling the ship, which means you forcibly sink the ship, you ingress water into the ship by holding the valves or pump in water and she sinks to the bottom. Now, scuttling was never an option because there was not enough water in the Victoria Dock at that time, which would make scuttling effective. So all these bigwigs gathered on the jetty kept discussing the various pros and cons without arriving at a definite decision what is to be done. What they didn't realize was time was running out for the Steichen. The only thing they managed to do was 25 detonators, which were in number 1 hole. They managed to remove it. It reduced the chances of explosion, but it didn't negate the chances of explosion. You already had 9 fire tenders coming from Victoria Dock. They sent an additional fire tenders, and you had a total of 13 fire tenders now on the jetty, pouring water into the hole without knowing the seat of fire. 32 hoses poured nearly 900 tons of water into number 2 hole without knowing where the seat of fire was. What it led to was Steichen developed a list to starboard. Now, a list is, when you put in water and the ship actually is on an even keel, but if it is unstable or improper loading, she starts tilting to one side. This is what a list to starboard will look like. That's why I said pronounced as starboard, but spelled as S-T-A-R-B-O-D, starboard. The ship becomes unstable. And to prevent this, ships, if in harbor, additional berthing hawsers will have to be passed on the opposite side and held down to the jetty. And this is what happened on Steikin. Listing to, because of the water being pumped in blindly, she started listing to starboard. And there was an advantage in this. This is what the list was. Right now, they were pouring in water into the number 2 hole without knowing where the seat of fire is. But when the ship started listing to starboard, the port side was raised. And this area here came above the water, and they could see paint flaking, and a section of the hull on the port side was bright red, and paint started peeling off. This was the first indication that this place here could be the possible seat of fire. Because remember, this side had come up, this side had gone down, the what was underwater had come up. This was the first indication of the seat of fire. Now, having located the seat of fire, obviously they couldn't enter the hatch from top because of the intense heat. If you could get a gas cutting equipment and make a hole on the ship side, then the hoses could be put in through this hole, and the water would reach the seat of fire, and the fire could be doused. So all that was required was an efficient gas cutting machine. There was a gas cutting machine in one of the fire tenders. The fire tender was the staging was raised, and one gentleman got onto the staging and wanted to start the gas cutting machine, lit the fire, but the gas cutting machine would not start because of improper mixture. 14th April was the day when nothing would go right for the Steikin. An efficient gas cutting machine would take only about 10 minutes to drill a hole in the ship side, because the thickness was only 3/8 of an inch. But 14th April was not that day for the Steikin. In fact, it was a day when even hope was forlorn. Having seen that the only gas cutting machine available with them was not operational, they asked for replacements from Mazagon Docks, which was the nearest industrial unit, and from Messrs. Alcock, Ashdown and Company, which provided or supplied gas cutting machines to the fire brigade. The ones from Alcock, Ashdown and Co. never reached. The gas cutting machine from Mazagon Docks did arrive, but it coincided with the first explosion. Time, of course, was running out for the Steikin. The upper deck. This was the upper deck. Because of the seat of fire was here, and this entire thing, the heat was so intense that the upper deck of the ship started heating up. And since water was also being poured here, some of the water spilled out, and the water, when it came in touch with the deck, it became steam. And it was scalding water over which the firemen stood and were continuing their firefighting operations. Water is actually an antidote for a fire, but in this case, water was actually aiding the fire, and this is how it happened. Water was being pumped in, and because of the tilt and gravity, water started collecting on the starboard side. And as it started collecting on the starboard side, it started pushing the cotton which was placed here and the cargo which was placed here, started pushing it down. When this part, the cargo here was being pushed down, this started rising. And with every ton of water which went in, the seat of fire started rising, and it kept rising to such an extent that it came very close to the ammunition which was kept here. So water, instead of being an antidote, was actually going to aid the fire. The first to catch fire was the timber here, because between the ammunition boxes you put timber, dunnage, it's called dunnage, to provide a buffering effect to the ammunition boxes. The timber caught fire. The minute timber caught fire, black smoke started belching out of the hole here. And the flames started coming above the combing. This is the combing. It started coming above the hatch. And along with this, burning pieces of cotton started floating through the air. Because you had cotton, you had ammunition, you had timber inside number 2 hole. The final act. Between 350 and 4.6, the ammunition had caught fire and great tongue of flame started shooting up from here. When this tongue of the flame started coming up through the hatch and went as high as the mast, the captain knew that it's up, the game is up, there's nothing more one could do, and he gave the order to abandon ship. When this whole thing was being enacted on board, on the quay, on the jetty, there were a whole confused mob of people. The famous Indian habit of watching a tamasha. The jetty and the quay was full of people who were actually onlookers trying to see what was happening on board the Typhoon. And as the cotton was being thrown out from here, it would go up in the air and fall on the jetty, and burning bales of cotton would go through the shed which was storing cotton, and the sheds caught fire. After giving the order to abandon the ship, when everybody had left, the captain was still on board, and he had to ensure that every person on board had vacated before he could leave. So he started walking around the ship from the forward end and to the aft end. And when he came to the aft end, the after end, he saw that the hatch of number 4 hole was open. They had not closed it. With all the action happening on the forward part of the ship, before people abandoned the ship, they did not close the hatch of the number 4 and number 5 hold. And please remember, number 4 hold had twice the ammunition of number 2 hold. It was actually the last straw on the camel's back. After he took the complete rounds of the ship and made sure everybody was out, he went on to the jetty and started walking backwards towards the main gate. And when he was abreast of the stern of the ship, the Typhoon blew up. The time was 6 minutes past 4. When the first explosion took place, the forward part of the ship, remember, number 2 hole was in the forward part. The number 2 part, the forward part of the ship sheared off, skid 30 yards, and then sank. The aft part of the ship was stubbornly buoyant, and the and remained at its berth. And remember, number 4 hole was open. It had twice the ammunition. The rear part was stubbornly buoyant and still floating. As the burning cotton bales and hot apron was thrown up into, went up in the air, it went up in the air and fell down into the number 4 hole because the hatch was open. And number 2 hole, like I kept saying, has had more ammunition than number 2 hole. All the burning cotton and metal pieces from number 2 hole, which were thrown up, would go up in the air and fall down into the number 4 hole. 34 minutes after the first explosion, the second explosion took place at 4:40. The first explosion was basically a lateral explosion. What it meant was, because of the amount of water inside it, when the ammunition blew up, it created a tidal wave, sort of a tidal wave, like a tsunami tidal wave laterally. And most of the damage happened within the dock. The second explosion was a more devastating and vertical one, because all the ammunition which caught fire was thrown up about 300 feet into the air. It was around 4:40 p.m. The sea breeze had set in, which means the breeze was blowing from the sea onto the land. And as it went up in the air, and because of the sea breeze it was thrown onto the land. This is the affected areas. Now, you could look at either, but this is the better, it's a better figure to look at. This is the Victoria Dock. Here, the Victoria Dock, ground zero. And if you take a radius of 1,000 yards, that was the most affected area. This was the docks, the Victoria and Princess Dock. You had the Frere Road, the P. de Mello Road here, and the other side of the road had all these godowns which were tightly packed, and here was the Wadi Bandar area. This was the entire area which came under which was the affected area, 1,000 yards from ground zero. If you look at this map here, the Victoria Dock, okay, this is again P. de Mello Road, Victoria Dock, Princess Dock, and Indira Dock. This was the sea. This was the main area which was affected. You could divide the areas into five different parts, which was the affected area. You had the Victoria and the Princess Dock, which sustained the maximum damage. North of Victoria Dock, here, were the stowage tanks of Burma Shell, which when oil which used to come inside, and they should be stored in oil tanks. So if you go on the harbor line from, say, along Sivri and Badala, you find those cylindrical tanks in which fuel is stored. This was the stowage area for Burma Shell. Alexandra Dock, not affected at all. Harbor, the cotton bales and metal parts which were thrown up into the air also fell into the water. There were a whole lot of country crafts here which caught fire. P. de Mello Road, across P. de Mello Road was the godown area, tightly packed, decongested, and in close proximity to each other. And this contained nearly 1 lakh bales of cotton in this godown area. We look at this individually. This is the Victoria Dock before the explosion. 14 ships here, 12 ships here, total 26 ships. This is what happened after the first explosion. Every ship came off its moorings and they were drifting dangerously within the dock. This ship, which was right behind Steikin, Jalapadma, a 4,000-ton ship, she was thrown up 50 feet into the air. Imagine a 4,000-ton ship being thrown up 50 feet up in the air, turned at right angles, and when it came down, it fell across the jetty. Every ship was affected, some severely, some not so severely. This is the first photograph taken of Ground Zero. This was taken by a Wellington bomber, which was based at Bombay. And this is the first photo. This is the aerial view of Ground Zero. What happened? I'm going to show you some images of what happened in the Princess Victoria dock and in the adjoining areas. These images might be disturbing, but these images have to be shown to show the extent of damage the city incurred. This is the Jalapadma which I told you. Which was lifted 30 feet into the air, turned at right angles, fell onto the jetty. This is the Victoria dock, the damage. This is the road which comes from Karnak Bandar onto P. de Mello Road. This image which you see is at the St. Xavier's High School in the Crawford Market area. This piece of metal is actually part of one of the propellers of the ship. It fell into this compound. We don't know which is the ship because it was a broken part, and this has been put up as an artifact by the St. Xavier's School. If you were at VT, this is what you would have seen. These are the gold bars which I told you, gold bars in 31 boxes, each box having 4, so 124 gold bars, but they are representative. This is not the gold bars of the Steikin. Each bar had the seal of Bank of England. It had a serial number, and it weighed about 28 pounds, which is about 12 kilos. So this photograph is only representative. This is a news item from the Bombay Chronicle of 22nd April 1944, which says that all the gold bars which were thrown up after the explosion were recovered. I don't think this is quite correct. So I don't think this was quite correct because we really have no idea about what happened to the gold bars. The effect was so devastating that Mahatma Gandhi, when he came to Bombay in May, he made a visit to the dock area to see for himself the extent of damage. This is the Bombay Chronicle of 20th May 1944 reporting Gandhiji's visit. When this explosion happened, the British government, because of wartime, censorship was already in progress, the censorship was already on, and they clamped down on information which was to be released in the press. They issued a very terse communique saying that there was a problem, there was an accident, and people need not worry, but they will get back into, the port will get back into action soon. No, it was actually a very stupid thing to say because people have actually seen what had happened, and this clamping down of information led to a whole lot of rumors being spread. The only publication which came out with what actually happened was a Life magazine of 22nd May 1944. Being an American magazine, it didn't come under the censorship. And this was the first time people got to know what actually happened. As usual, the government of India set up an inquiry commission, and the inquiry commission consisted of the following members. Leonard Stone, who was Leonard Stone was the last English Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court. He was the chairman of the commission, assisted by Justice Davle, who was the Pusain judge of the retired Pusain judge of the Patna High Court. And there are two naval officers, because the commission forwarded the report in two parts. In part one, Admiral Holland was part of the inquiry commission, and part two, Captain Bayfield was the naval representative. The commission examined 255 witnesses, and they were sworn to secrecy, and the examination was done in camera at the High Court. The report came in two parts. Part one is actions taken before and during the disaster and causes of the explosion. Part two is actions after the first explosion and damages suffered by the ship, by the city. Now, very strangely, the part one of the commission part one of the report was submitted by the commission on 11th of September. The trustees of the Port Trust got to see it only on 18th of September. But the Free Press Journal of 12th April reproduced the entire commission report in extension. So even before the trustees got to know of this, the Free Press Journal had already put out in extenso the entire part one report. The findings of the commission, what exactly caused this fire was, it's a summary of what I just said. Incorrect stowage of cargo at Karachi. Ammunition which had come to the ship had come on 12th of April. Ammunition was first disembarked only on 13th of April. This delay, if the ammunition was completely disembarked between 12th and 13th, this explosion would not have taken place. What caused the ignition of cotton in number 2 hold is still a question mark. Nobody actually knows the exact reason because nothing was left of the ship for a forensic examination. So this is best it's a circumstantial thing that it could have been accident ignition of cotton in number 2. How the ignition happened, the commission couldn't really say. The failure of the authorities and those present to appreciate the gravity of the situation. This was a very telling remark on all the officials who were present there, because instead of arriving at a decision, they kept discussing among themselves what is to be done. And there was no one central authority who would take a decision and say, this is to be done. Even when the explosion took place, it is not that people were there was no action taken, but it was done sporadically and on an ad hoc basis. And the steps initiated to extinguish the fire was highly inadequate. There was no contingency plan to avoid, if a disaster like this happened, what was the contingency plan? Nothing was laid down. This was the most telling thing. The regulations then in force had a central authority who would coordinate and take action in the case of an external attack. The civil defense organization would come into force, but because this was not was due to an external attack, things drifted. There was nobody who, nobody either from the government or from anywhere who would act as the central figure and coordinate the rescue activities of the various agencies. Casualties and damages, the exact figure will never be known. These figures are taken from the Inquiry Commission, and they are very clear in that this at best, this is an educated guess. The exact figures will be never known because a lot of bodies were charred and beyond recognition. Many were thrown into the sea and they must have gone off with the tide. So the exact figures will never be known. Around the port, around 300 acres, of area, which was across the railroad or the PDML road, which had all those godowns, etc., was completely damaged. And because this was because of the collateral damage. I told 26 ships in Victoria and Princess Dock, 10 had to be disposed of scrap, and the total tonnage lost was nearly 35,000 tons. The insurance thing, of course, came into play. There were 14 insurance companies which were involved in this. Initially, the insurance companies said they will not pay, but a little bit of arm twisting by the government and a little prodding by Lloyd's of London, they relented and compensation was paid. I've given the figures of 1944 and the equivalent things in 2021. The Inquiry Commission didn't go into this. There's a separate commission which was set up by the Association of Insurance Writers. The 14 companies which were involved in this, they came together and set up a commission, and with the help of the government and Lloyd's decided on the amount of compensation to be paid under each head. If it's fire, marine insurance, uninsured property, personal insurance, miscellaneous. It's a very complicated calculation. It is there in the Commission of Inquiry, but I have not put it here because it was too complicated. I've just given the overall figures. What happened to all the debris? You had the Princess Victoria Dock completely damaged, 300 acres of contiguous area completely damaged. Now, 350 trucks made 4 trips a day, ferrying 3,500 tons of debris. And they did it for 7.5 months. And the total debris that was accumulated was nearly 8 lakh tons. And it was dumped at Haybandar and along the Sivri Fort Road at 4 sites, and it stretched up to 2 kilometers. This is ground zero, Victoria Dock. Haybandar, the first site, and 3 sites along the Sivri Fort Road. I've shown it here. This is Haybandar, where you see the red thing is where the debris was dumped. And this is along the Sivri Fort. 8 lakh tons of debris. Wartime on Bombay, a great staging port for Allied forces. So the docks had to be put into force, had to be put into operation as quickly as possible. And the government decreed that there was only one institution which would carry this out, and that was the army. The entire dock area and the contiguous area was handed over to the army. And if The destruction and mayhem caused because of the explosion was a testimony to man's folly. The reconstruction part was the epitome of man's ingenuity. It's a story which has never been told, never been written, and I hope someday somebody tells this story. It's a separate talk by itself. I will not go into it, but this statement says it all. The apathy of the government was only matched by individual citizens and organizations in Bombay rising to the occasion and helping people. There were over 20 to 25 instances of people who came on their own, or organizations which came on their own to ameliorate the sufferings of the people. There's no time to go through each and every case, but I've taken 4 typical cases, 4 individuals or 4 groups of people who came together and did what they did. Mr. Ali Mohammed Meklai was the honorary treasurer of the aid to civil hospitals in emergency. And he knew that in a situation like this, hospitals would very, very quickly run out of medicines and first aid kit. So on his own, he hired a taxi. For 7 hours, he went around all the chemists in Bombay, using his own money to buy medicines and first aid kit. Most of the chemists gave it at a cost price. Some of them gave it gratis. Collecting all this, he went to JJ Hospital and gave the entire thing to JJ Hospital. His taxi driver, he insisted, the taxi driver refused to take the fare when he had taken him all around the city. But when he insisted, Mr. Meklai insisted that he should take his money. He took the money, and after dropping Meklai, went to the nearest chemist, bought bandages and first aid kit, went back to the hospital and gave it. The spirit of Bombay, or this sense of doing something, was not restricted to only Indians. 5 women of the American Red Cross who were on deputation to Bombay, the names are given here. They realized that with all the rescue work which is going on within the dock and outside the dock, people would need to have refreshments. So they got together, got hold of the transport, set up a temporary canteen, and entered Victoria Dock, which was the seat of, which was the ground zero. The army which was was now fighting the fire there, the major came out and told the nurses that it won't be possible. He'll send the soldiers one by one so they could refresh themselves. But they realized that this would lead to loss of time and dilution of the rescue work. So disregarding that, they drove the wagon right, the station wagon right inside, set up a temporary canteen between 2 burning warehouses, one having paint, the other having cotton. And they held on to their position till every single soldier was served refreshments. Naik Wahid Bakshi, who was from the Indian Army Ordnance Corps, he was given the task of emptying a warehouse which had broken acid bottles. He had 5 people with him, and by that, when they finished clearing the broken bottles from the warehouse, most of them had lost their fingers. And this, of course, is my favorite story of the spirit of Bombay. Barjoji Kuwarji Motiwala was a retired engineer working with Bombay Dyeing. He had retired from Bombay Dyeing, and he was staying with his family at Kukana House in Girgaon Road. when the first explosion happened, he gathered his family members and vacated the flat and went down and stood on the road. When the second explosion happened, through the corrugated roof of the balcony, he saw a piece of metal, burning metal, landing on his balcony. Now, he didn't want the flat to catch fire, so he went up to retrieve this piece of metal. And when he went there, the metal was hot. It had a marking of the Bank of England and a serial number Z13256. It was the gold bar from the Staiki. Each gold bar weighed 28 pounds. So he knew this was a gold bar. He picked up this gold bar, went across to the police commissioner's office and handed over this gold bar. The officer on duty was highly impressed with his honesty and said that he would recommend to the authorities that Mr. Motiwala be rewarded for his honesty. Mr. Motiwala responded that whatever he got, 50% of the amount he would donate to a relief fund which would be set up to ameliorate the sufferings of the people. With that, he went home. Being a government award, it took its time in coming, but when it came, he received a check for 990 rupees. Now, the gold bar was valued at 90,000 rupees, 1944 prices, which would be approximately 40 lakhs in today's value. He was given 990 rupees as reward, which is 1% of the cost. And in today's value would be approximately 45,000. This was a huge amount in those days. And he had second thoughts about, he had said 50% of the whatever he gets, he would give it to the relief fund. This amount being huge, he had changed his mind. He gave the entire amount to the relief fund, which was set up by the government to provide succor and relief to people who had suffered in the explosion. Ladies and gentlemen, now you know why Bombay adores her Parsis. No story of the explosion will ever be complete without paying a tribute to the firemen. It is true that there were errors of judgment which was made on Staiki, but it was the firefighting department which saved the day, when the collateral fires had taken place in the godown area. For 3 days and 3 nights, they formed a firewall all along Muhammad Ali Road and made sure that the fire did not spread from the dock area and the godowns onto the, into the living spaces west of Marine. If that had happened, you can imagine the amount of death and destruction which would have taken place. The fire tent, the fire engine which you see on the right of the screen, is the one which was used in 1944. It is preserved and kept at the fire brigade headquarters in Baikal. And on the left, this is Mr. young Meherwanji, who joined the auxiliary fire service in 1942 as a 17-year-old. And this is Norman Coombs, who was the chief fire officer of the Bombay Fire Brigade. This is in 1944. A young Meherwanji and Mr. Norman Coombs, who was the chief fire officer. And it's a privilege to have Mr. Meherwanji's son, Tayo, in this. He's here in the audience. Later on, Meherwanji rose to be the chief fire officer of Bombay Fire Brigade. And when he was the chief fire officer, he invited Mr. Norman Coombs to visit Bombay. And this is the photograph taken in 1982 when Mr. Norman Coombs visited Bombay. Rustam Palamkot, he was the first Parsi fire officer of at the Fort Fire Station. He was in the thick of firefighting on board the Staiki. And when the first explosion took place, he was still fighting the fire. And the explosion actually threw him off. It tore off his torso, and he could only be recognized by the buttons of his uniform, because the officers' buttons were quite different from the firemen's buttons. And it is these buttons by which one could recognize him. This is courtesy Mr. Zamir Palamkot, who is his great-grandson. Mr. Palam, this is the city, this is Palamkot's son, Rustam Palamkot's son. The city, this is Mr. M.D. Bhatt, who was then the mayor, Norman Coombs. And this is Rustam Palamkot's younger brother, who was also a fire officer in the Indian Ordnance Factory at Kharki. And the city, as a mark of respect, presented him with a plaque. These are two memorials for the firemen. The one on the left is at the fire brigade headquarters in Baikala, set up in 1946, but renovated during Mr. Merwanji's time as the chief fire officer. The one on the right, which you see, is in the Bombay Port Trust. And it is in memory of these firemen who gave up their life that 14th April every year is celebrated as National Fire Service Day. Epilogue, I come to the end of my presentation. This is what Princess and Victoria Dock look like today. This is Victoria Dock. This is Princess Dock. Filled up between 2007 and 2009 because the authorities thought that this is no more feasible to keep it as a wet dock. And with it, a part of Bombay's history has been lost forever. This building, which you see, which is a 1891 stone structure, solid stone structure, which is the only building standing which was witness to the dock explosion. This is a solid stone structure, suffered no great damage despite being so close to the ground zero, because it was solid stone structure. Today, it has been abandoned. For 25 years, it's never been used. And this is 20,000 square feet of prime real estate in the heart of Bombay. This, what you see, is the clock tower. I remember I told you the clock, at 6 minutes past 4, when the first explosions took place, this clock, the watch stopped functioning, and the minute hand got stuck at minute 6, reminding people for a very long time what happened on that fateful day. Sorry. I come to the end. The paper would not be, or this talk would not be complete without acknowledging the contribution of so many people who helped me put this together. Their names are given on the slide. I will, I will just quickly tell them: Professor Arnachalam, Admiral Nadkarni, and Admiral Avati, the trio at Maritime History Society, who helped me a great deal in putting information on this. Family members of late Mr. Merwanji and Mr. Zamir Palamkot, Admiral Rao, Captain T. Anil Kumar, and Sucheta Jadhav, who helped me with this. The editor and staff of Free Press Journal in Patiana. Nargis Sunawala, a young journalist, a former, she used to work for the Times of India. She is no more a journalist. We've spent many hours discussing the history of Bombay and discussing this particular subject. 4 wonderful people at Khaki Tours, who provided me with a lot of information and visuals for this talk. And my fellow members at the Bombay Local History Society, Dr. Shubha Pandya, Rafiq Baghdadi, Mr. Deepak Rao, Shekhar Krishnan, and Rohita Terkar. Thank you very much. I have finished. I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you, Commander Narayan.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
At the start, I had promised all our guests and viewers that we were in for a treat. And you have more than proven my point.
Thank you, sir.
Your step-by-step explanation have brought alive the journey from sticking from England to Karachi, the disastrous steps at Karachi, which laid the stage for the tragedy in Bombay, and then the docking of sticking at berth number 1, the withholding of vital information from relevant and vital personnel, and the minute-by-minute explanation, literally minute-by-minute explanation of the events after docking at berth number 1 in Victoria Dock. All these make us feel that it's almost as if we were witnessing the event that you were describing. The illustrations which you have chosen, especially the illustrations of the cargo holding areas and the entrance to the cargo holding areas, their location, what was put in where, and why that contributed to the enormity of the tragedy following the explanation also were superb, and they certainly made us understand what you were saying very well. And then there was this movie with which you started off, which showed us the actual explosions. And then your vivid descriptions, 1,400-ton Jalapadma lifted 30 feet into the air. I mean, these are superb methods that you have used to bring the facts alive to us. Whilst the disaster was man-made, the narrative of the valor of the Auxiliary Fire Brigade and the examples which you have narrated under Bombay Meri Jaan, they are redeeming features. The reward to Mr. Motiwala is typical of the appreciation by bureaucratic authorities. You would imagine that they would have been a little more generous. And it is to his credit that he donated the entire sum towards rehabilitation. How we wish there were more like Messrs. Palamkot, Merwanji, Coombs, and Motiwala. Now, before I lay the talk open for queries from others, I have a query of my own. If this situation was to recur today, are you optimistic that the steps taken would be such that no tragedy follows?
I'll give you a very honest answer. History has a nasty habit of repeating itself. Maybe there's a full-fledged organization now in force. Okay, and I don't think it would be so bad like today. If it happened, if it was ever to happen now, it wouldn't be so bad. But we have learned our lessons. Remedies and organizations have come into existence whereby this kind of a thing will not happen. At least it might be an accident, yes, but a man-made tragedy, unlikely. That's my view.
Of course, we have now many, many better technical advances which would enable us to collect and pass on information in a much more efficient manner. But I wonder whether the bureaucratic measures would live up to the prevention of such a tragedy.
You see, it is not that these measures were not in force then. But nobody, it was in the midst of a war. There was an organization which would have come into force. I'll give you an example. When the auxiliary fire service was disbanded, one of the reasons given was because there are so many private institutions having their own ambulances, the cotton mills, the industrial establishments. In case of an external attack, these would be placed, they could be commanded by the fire brigade and placed under the fire brigade. But this act was not invoked. There were 200, while the city burned for 3 days, 3 nights, 229 fire tenders, which belonged to various industrial establishments, were lying idle in their premises because some bureaucrat then said that this is not an external attack, this is an accident. The letter of the law prevailed over the spirit of the law. But I don't think that will happen now because there are enough checks and balances. There was a civil defense movement then also, but that civil defense movement would come only if it was an external attack. This was not an external attack. That was the basic thing of no central authority taking charge. But this has been circumvented now. There are procedures and checks in force where this kind of a thing, at least a central authority not taking action would happen.
No,
but then bureaucracy is bureaucracy, yes.
No, I accept that. But what I was referring to is the cutter that was needed to make a hole in the side of the ship so that the water hoses could be directed into hole number 2 where the fire had started. And they found that the cutter was just not working.
Yes, those kind of things will see.
Are the problems.
They actually could not go inside the hole because of fire and smoke. Now, smoke could have been circumvented with smoke mask. But they just didn't have anti-flame suits. Today you have those. So the infrastructure is there, and I wouldn't blame the firemen because they just didn't have the wherewithal. And once it had taken place, the fire, and they could not, it could have been doused immediately when it was noted, but that didn't happen. But those kind of things will not happen now because ammunition by itself has become a lot safer now. And the organization inside the port and outside, even for these kind of eventualities, have been activated. There are regular exercises being carried out by the fire brigade, by the forces, by the port trust. We have learned a lesson, but then I certainly agree with you. What is called, unless we actually have an event like this and people react, we will never know.
I see on the chat side that Mr. Mohammad Shoaib has 3 queries. So, Mr. Shoaib, can you please voice your queries? If you unmute yourself, please, and then, because I don't see your queries on the chat side, I just see 3 queries. In the meantime, there's a query from Tulika Tripathi, and the question is, were there any changes in the guidelines and procedures at that time? I presume what she's asking is, have there been subsequent changes in guidelines and procedures at that time? And did any incident such as this occur in any other Indian port thereafter?
No, it didn't happen in any Indian port, but 14 days after this happened, a similar incident happened in a German port. But we've learned our lessons. I'm not saying this might, a thing like this will not happen. It was basically in my view, the central argument was that there was, no central figure taking charge of it. Even when the explosion had taken place and they had decided to set up a force, that force should have been set up in the port trust office. For some strange reason, it was set up in the police commissioner's office. Now, the police had a very definite task to perform, but firefighting and working inside the dock was not their forte. But for some strange reason, that is where it was set up. Now you have this, there's an organization which will kick in when you have such kind of a contingency, and periodically, I mean, I won't go into the details because that's not possible, but the army, the services, the port trust and all of the agencies come together and we exercise these kind of things. So I don't think, I mean, an accident is an accident. It can happen anytime. We don't know till it happens what is the consequences. But these kind of errors I don't think will happen.
Mr. Shoaib has put his queries up on the chat side. Number one was, what did SS stand for?
Steamship.
The second question is, does our NDMA have any provisions for such an event?
Sorry, I didn't get the second question.
The second question is, does our NDMA,
National Disaster Management Association,
have
yes.
any provisions should such an event occur again?
Yes, there is in every port, and in not only in a port, even elsewhere, these kind of contingencies, this can happen, and there are contingencies which will kick into force when it happens. There is an organization existing. How effective that is, we'll only know when an incident happens.
The third question is, he is referring to the blast in Beirut, where ammunition was not involved at all, but there was tragedy. So how are we prepared to tackle a similar event now?
I mean, this is the same thing repeated again. There is, like I said, there's an organization which will come into force, the Civil Defense Organization, the services, the Port Trust, all services will come in. We have catered for such contingencies, there's no doubt about it, but then it's never been tested. So till it is tested, we will not know, as long as we learn lessons from the past and correct them, that is a redeeming feature, but it's not been proved yet, it's not been tested yet.
Are there any mock exercises being carried out?
Yes, there are. The Navy does it virtually every second day. Not at this scale, but I'm sure even the Bombay Port Trust does it. The firemen do it. They all do independently, and they also come together. The National Fire Service Day, it began as a single day event. Now it's a 1 week event. It starts on the 14th of April, goes on till 21st April. And it is in this week that most of these things are exercised.
Commander Narayan, I have several messages here which talk of your spellbinding presentation. The fact that although somebody has listened to such a talk earlier, but this talk remains a thriller, that this is a great talk, excellent talk, detailed presentation, wonderful learning experience, and so on. There are several messages here which pay great tribute to your ability to bring this episode to life.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. And thank you everybody for those wonderful messages.
Can I say something?
That is Kayomar's Merwanji, sir, who's... Yeah, Kayo, please go ahead.
And just only one request is, like we are discussing, like you have mentioned, that everybody, the Navy, the fire brigade, and everybody does it. We also need to inculcate a more proactive behavior and have people to train in firefighting. The 7 days work that has been done in the fire service week is just to make them aware, but we need to have people who train for such situations, like they are volunteers, like they can be emergency services, or they can be in civil defense. They don't have to work for civil defense. Now, the thing is, what happens, which used to happen before when dad was in fire services, every night there used to be 4 or 6 civil defense personnel who were paid 1 rupee a day or 10 rupees a day. I'm not aware of the figure, but they were paid 1 rupee, and they would come in as night duty on the fire engines. So if there was a call out, they would go on those fire engines. Now, the difference in the civil defense and fire brigade was the civil defense volunteers, they were in their khakis and with their helmet, whereas the firemen were in their woolies. Now things have changed, but similarly, we need more people to be more proactive and go for the training with civil defense, can go with for a training with the fire brigade, or can go with for a training with other institutions, or go to the nautical training schools and train in firefighting. And they can be a fire team for that particular office or that particular building that they're working. And then they could also be a correlative team in the National Disaster Management Plan who would be licensed to assist, or who could be on a register to assist as volunteers. Right now, we are only proactive in a way is that any disaster happens is we are calling out the Navy, we are calling out the Army, we are calling out the civil defense, we are calling out the police, we are calling out the fire brigade. So we need individuals in the public as well in that particular area to be more proactive.
I couldn't agree more with you, Kayo, because firefighting is everybody's business. It's not it's not a very esoteric thing that only certain people can do it, because the mantra for dousing a fire is catching it as early as you can, and then fighting the fire immediately. Firefighting is everybody's business. There are certain things which cannot be done by an individual. You require a full-fledged organization doing it. But to say that, you see a fire, you ring up the fire brigade 100, whatever the emergency, and then wait, you're losing time. I entirely agree with you. It should be everybody's concern.
Yeah. So they could be more proactive in the sense is I have seen times when there is a fire in a particular area. Now, talking about number 1, number 2, number 3, these are the fire numbers given in a way that basically when it says number 2, then the deputies would go, and when there was number 1, the chief fire officer would go, and then there would be brigade call. Brigade call is maximum number of fire engines would be pulled out all over Bombay. But the situation in Bombay with the traffic is atrocious at the moment. And we had, at that time, we had drivers who really knew their engines. They would be jumping dividers sideways with a fire engine, no matter what. A snorkel passing through a bicular bridge, for flyover bridge, with little gap, with those drivers so experienced. I don't know if it happens now, because they were the trained drivers with BST and individually as well. So those were saving time. They used to go in opposite direction of the traffic, literally opposite direction at a speed of not less than 40, because the speed otherwise on the other side was zero, practically zero. At least oncoming traffic would move off and the fire engines will go through. So if there is no fire engine at a closer point, these are the basic people, dedicated people, which could start off firefighting, and subsequently when the main fire team came in, they would handle the situation. Same thing with other disasters as well, national disasters. And another thing is people who go out of their way to help, they are first taken at task as to why they have done that action. Instead of saying, okay, you have done the task, you handled it well, how better could have been handled? So these are the few scenarios people will have to look at to help the National Disaster Management Association or whatever it is, and the surrounding citizens, more so important.
Commander Narayan, we are now running short of time. So I'm just going to give you a suggestion which has been made. And that suggestion is that your presentation would make a spellbinding documentary film or even a feature film, and whether you would like to consider this proposal. And the second is from a young couple in our neighborhood, Alim and Nasim Kareem, and they have said, "Thank you, Commander, you have excelled yourself."
Alim and Nasim are great friends of mine. Thank you very much, both of you. Now, about the movie, I'll give you a very honest answer. I simply don't know. Because like most of us, I see movies, most of it on television, and halfway through I switch it off. Most of them I sit through, but I have no clue what goes into making a movie, selecting a story, writing a script. So it would be unfair for me to comment on it without knowing anything about the subject. So the honest answer, I don't know.
This is a suggestion.
Yes,
maybe
if somebody takes it up, yes, because enough information is now available on it. It's not that it's not available, but whether it can be made into a movie, documentary, etc. My information on movies is zilch, so I will not comment on it.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
Can I now hand the proceedings over to Dr. Nawaz Modi? Dr. Modi.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I think my video is not working, but anyway, I've been through more than 2.25 hours of a wonderful presentation with Commodore Mohan Narayanan. And I may mention here that the Kyarkama Oriental Institute is in fact eagerly waiting to hear Commodore Narayan's government fellowship lectures on the Wadia shipbuilders, which of course have got postponed, but we look forward, sir, to having you with us by next year. So
my pleasure, Dr. Modi.
So these are the most prestigious lectures of the Institute, and we really look forward to hearing them. It has been a wonderful experience with this kind of a detailed scrutiny and description, which I don't think any one of us possibly could have expected anywhere in this level of detail. 2 hours passed, and we did not even realize that time is passed in this fashion. It really happens, but I think all of us were glued to our seats. And thank you, Dr. Pandya, for an excellent introduction and a summation, and for monitoring all the queries, which I have been watching, have been quite considerable. I'm also very grateful to Mrs. Utakshi Mistry, the principal of the Bai RFD Pandey Girls High School, who made this presentation possible with all the technical expertise that she provided for us. And I find that the kind of people who entered this lecture were wonderfully unique, because Kaivar's Merwanji Wright, all the way from Australia, his presence made a great deal of difference, and his comments also added to this. Perhaps we can even consider creating this awareness at the school levels. I do not know if such a program is there, and we are perhaps, with our interest in schools, we should consider training firefighting at the school level itself. I'm very grateful to be able to deliver this short vote of thanks. And I would just like to mention that next talk which we have is, of course, a totally different presentation on Zoroastrian rituals by Kerman, who is going to present on some very unknown, unforgettable, forgotten rituals. It is a very specialized talk, and we will be presenting this to you quite soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, the audience, for being with us. And most importantly, all of you who kept yourselves muted, all of you switched off your videos, which made the presentation so clear and possible. Thank you very much.